thanks everyone for joining us today on this webinar. I'm your moderator, Patrick Patyandi, an NCSL staffer here, and I'm really excited about this topic since it cuts to the heart of our democracy. And I'm part of NCSL's elections and redistricting program, and so civics education is really an important topic for me here. To give just one reason why it's so important to me, consider this fact. During the 2014 midterm election, only 12% of eligible 18 to 21-year-old college or university students voted. Certainly that's only one measure, but we're going to dive deep into the topic today with our great lineup of speakers. Before I get to that lineup, I just want to mention that if you have questions during the webinar, feel free to either text it into the box right there that'll appear on your left, or feel free to email me directly at this email address. And I'm going to be keeping an eye on that here as we move along. And so then I'll kind of pop in with a question at an appropriate moment, or we can kind of wait towards the end as well for our speakers to all address those questions towards the end. But feel free to send those along at any point, and we'll try to keep track of those. And certainly, if it's something that we don't cover today, we'll be sure to follow up with you after as well if we don't have time to get to it. But we also now have our three speakers lined up. Our first speaker, Elizabeth C. Maddow, is an associate research professor and the director of the Center for Youth Political Participation at the Rutgers University Eagleton Institute of Politics. Professor Maddow will cover the state of civics education today. She was recently quoted in the New York Times in an opinion piece. She pointed out that, quote, over the past 10 to 15 years, there's been a growing body of scholarship about how colleges can, in a nonpartisan evidence-based way, include lessons in civic engagement. She is the co-editor of Teaching Civic Engagement Across the Disciplines and is the author of Citizen Now, Engaging in Politics and Democracy. You also hear from NCSL expert Ben Irwin, a policy research analyst here with our education program on what the states have been up to on increasing civics education requirements. And next, Brian Barish, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and General Counsel of the Massachusetts State Senator Harriet Chandler's office, and he'll present details about Senate Bill 2375.
Hello.
And you can see both Professor Maddow and Brian there in the video. And first, I will hand it off here to Professor Maddow to start us off.
Thanks so much, Patrick, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be part of this webinar. As you see on this first slide here, after this, if you have more questions or you want to follow me on Twitter, my contact information is right there. And certainly, Patrick can always connect you with me after this. I'm happy to connect with people who are out there and have further questions. As Patrick said, my background is in American politics. My doctorate's from George Washington University, specializing in American politics. Here at Eagleton Institute at Rutgers, I engage really in a mixture of practice and research having to do with encouraging political learning, supporting political learning and engagement, whether it's elementary school students, high schoolers, or college students, even young adults. So some relevant research, Patrick mentioned the book that I am the lead editor on, published by the American Political Science Association. I also was co-principal investigator of some research that was funded by Circle called the Classroom Kitchen Table Connection about the role of incorporating news consumption in social studies curriculum. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that, either online or afterwards. So today, what I was hoping I could do is really just run through some current scholarship on civic engagement education, walk you through a few slides, and as you'll see, I'm going to make reference to a few important works, and they're listed. Actually, I have a slide that lists what I think are some of the most important, if you're trying to really get a sense of what research has been done, what are the best practices in civic engagement education. I've listed those there, but certainly it's just, scratching the surface. There's many others, so I'm happy to connect you with all of them. So the next slide would be just really starting with why it matters. I assume I'm preaching to the choir, but I wanted to start by why does civic engagement education matter. So we can do the next slide, Patrick. Thank you. Just starting with the fact that there are a lot of young people out there. We hear a lot about the millennial generation. A good resource here is the Pew Research Center. Do a lot of good research on millennials. And the age bracket for millennials are those born between 1981 and 1997. We have a lot of millennials out there. We have a lot of post-millennials out there. I don't think we've determined what we're exactly going to call them yet, but I'm sure we'll be coming up with a name soon and sticking with it. But it's a growing portion of the populace. More importantly, it's a growing portion of the electorate. In the most recent election, 18 to 29-year-olds actually outnumbered those 65 or older. So it's a large portion of the electorate. As Patrick said, certainly in the last midterm elections, turnout was not terribly strong among that cohort. It was certainly stronger, as it is for all age cohorts, for the general election. But it's a generation that certainly constitutes a large portion of the electorate. Also, it's important to note that the millennial generation, in a number of ways, demographically, attitudinally, are very unique. Again, large in size, the most ethnically diverse generation in American history. Large numbers of young adults are either immigrants themselves or children of immigrants, have a different, have had strong levels of education, especially compared to previous generations, have also faced some unique economic challenges. So certainly they are very affected by the political process and have a unique voice when it comes to public policy and the political process. Attitudinally, it's a generation that does not necessarily have the same conception of what democracy is, democratic citizenship is, civic duty, civic responsibility, very different versions of civic duty and responsibility between millennials and, say, World War II generation or even the baby boom generation. So it's a unique voice with a unique set of demographic attributes. So those are just two reasons why civic education matters, because we're looking at a body of citizens who need an education in citizenship. But I think it's worth stating at the outset, too, how important civic education is when it comes to democracy and the future of democracy. I always love to include this quote from John Dewey: "Democracy needs to be reborn anew every generation, and education is the midwife." It's so important to remember that democracy is not genetic. We're not born understanding what it means to be a Democrat, lowercase d, democratic citizen. These are skills, attributes, knowledge that need taught. I think especially important when you consider how many young adults are either immigrants themselves or their parents are immigrants. So there's not necessarily the same degree of parental socialization, political socialization. That is why getting a civic education in school matters. And the good news is civic education works. There was a period of time, I'd say 20 years ago or so, there was some real contention as to whether it mattered if students in the classroom, whether it was elementary schools, high schools, college, whether it really made a difference, whether civic education necessarily made a difference. Thankfully, we have a large body, a growing body of scholarship that demonstrates that civic education works, that there are positive benefits to including civic education in day-to-day instruction. There are positive benefits when it comes to levels of political knowledge. If you receive a strong civic education, it improves the likelihood that you're going to be an informed and active citizen in the future. It's predictive of future political participation. Certainly heightens one's interest in following politics, in consuming news, and it strengthens one's sense of political efficacy. And it's worth giving a little definition here of political efficacy. In political science, we're always talking about political efficacy, and there are different strains of political efficacy. One strain is referred to as internal political efficacy, or the notion that you're confident, you're qualified, you have a role to play in the democratic process. So when you have been given civics instruction, when you've been exposed to strong civics education, you have a sense that there's a role for you to play in democracy and that you're able to play a role in democracy. So in all of those ways, we know that civic education works. And as I said, we've got a good 20 years of good scholarship, not just coming out of political science, but a lot of it coming out of political science that shows that it works. So the next slide here, I want to share with you what do we mean when we talk about civic education. And it's really important, again, to make reference to the scholarship. One of the resources that I have listed in a slide that you'll see in a few minutes is a report called Guardian of Democracy. I strongly would recommend, and I have the URL up here, if you're just trying to get a really good sense of what literature has been done, what are the best practices in civic education, I strongly recommend Guardian of Democracy. It's a report that came out a few years ago, research really sponsored by the Campaign for the Civic Mission of Schools, which is headed by former Congressman Lee Hamilton and former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, both of whom are very outspoken when it comes to civic engagement education. But it's very important to understand that when we're talking about civic education, it's important to understand that civic education is multifaceted. If we want to prepare our future generations to be informed and engaged citizens, there are really three core strands of civic competency, and I've referenced here in this slide, Judith Turney-Purda uses the phrase 3 strands of civic competency. And I just want to explain them really quickly. If we are going to prepare our students to be informed and engaged citizens, we want them to have political knowledge, political skills, and political attitudes. So certainly we want to provide an education that gives them knowledge, helps them understand the processes of democracy, the key figures in American democracy, core components of American democracy, understanding what due process is, what rule of law is, how a bill becomes a law. All of those bits of information are very, very important. But they're not the sole source of civic education. In order to have well-rounded, prepared, informed, and engaged citizens, young adults also need an education in political skills and attitudes. So by skills, the research usually points to what's referred to as both cognitive and participative skills. Not only do we want students to understand the 3 branches of government and checks and balances, we want them to have, be able to engage critically, to be critical thinkers, to be able to, for example, read an op-ed and understand it, to be able to look at a political cartoon and be able to analyze it. We want them to be able to look at public opinion polls and understand them. So have the cognitive skills to understand American democracy, but also the participative skills necessary to be a democratic citizen, lowercase d, democratic citizen. Are they able to engage in political discussions? Can they collaborate with others to solve problems? Can they, do they feel comfortable when it comes to public speaking? Would they feel comfortable going to a public meeting and making a comment at a city council meeting, for example? So those are all skills that are involved in being a democratic citizen, and those are skills that need taught. Again, it's not necessarily genetic. And then lastly, political attitudes or dispositions is another important strand when it comes to making our young adults, our young people, civically competent. And that means, do they have the disposition to be an engaged, participative citizen? Do they feel an inclination to be participative, to actually vote, to pay attention to the news, to attend a public meeting? Do they have, as I said, that sense of efficacy, that sense of competence to be able to engage in these activities? So it's really important to emphasize from the outset that in order to create a civic education system that works, it needs to not just pay attention, there needs to be attention not just to political knowledge, but also skills and attitudes. You want civic education practices that include all of these, that recognize that civic education is multifaceted. So bearing that in mind, what are the best practices when it comes to teaching our young adults, teaching our high schoolers, our middle schoolers, our elementary students to be civically engaged? So this again comes from the Guardian of Democracy report. Obviously, certainly encourage you to go back and look at it. But based on a large body of scholarship, we know there are sort of a toolkit of how to offer a well-rounded and effective civic education for students. And I'll just run through them quickly. Certainly one, and it seems fairly rudimentary or obvious, but it's worth stating at the outset, is just providing civics instruction in curriculum. I know later in this webinar you're going to hear a little bit about the sort of curriculum that's offered, social studies curriculum that's offered, or civic education curriculum. But making sure that social studies classes, and not just social studies, school-wide civic education, certainly includes history and government, but also offers civics instruction. So that's a really important facet of, we certainly want schools to be offering and preferably even requiring civics instruction. So just offering it in the curriculum is one important component. Another best practice, and really can't emphasize this enough, is actually talking about current events in the classroom, engaging in political discussion, especially talking about things that are going on in the daily news, and especially those things that are controversial. More and more also, if you can relate it to local issues, helping students understand, for example, if there's an issue in their community, who the political actors are in their community that would address these issues. If it's potholes in the streets, who's responsible for fixing these potholes? Who should we go talk to? Being able to identify the city council, the role of the city council, the role of state legislatures in everyday problems in your community. So discussing current events in the classroom is a critical component and definitely a best practice in civic ed. Service and political learning. So taking what you're learning in the classroom and extending it to the community. So whether it's volunteering in a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen in your area, or something more explicitly political, involving your students in a campaign, having them register voters. Those are all opportunities to extend learning outside the classroom, offering experiential learning, and that certainly makes the lessons that are being offered in the classroom, helps them come alive and gives students those skills and the attitude that they can participate in the political process. Lots of good research showing that participation in extracurricular activities, not just overtly political, even sports, can have positive benefits and can be predictive of future political participation. School government is a perfect example of that. Those offer opportunities. They're almost little microcosms of democracy. Even if it's the chess club, if there's a president and a vice president and a secretary and a treasurer, what is the role of all of those officers in a chess club? How do you collaborate to raise money? How do you collaborate to put on a school dance? All of those offer opportunities to learn the skills that are related to civic participation. And then finally, participating in simulations of democratic processes, whether it's a simulation of a legislative hearing or a campaign. Those are when done well, offer really positive benefits and offer important lessons in civics and political participation. And it's worth mentioning, for all of these, so these are all best practices. Ideally, you want all of these. You want to craft a curriculum. You want your social studies standards to include all these best practices. You want frameworks, all curricular frameworks to include all of these different best practices in civic ed. You want to see all of these in classrooms. And you want, because they are, again, when using these, not only do you want to see them in the classroom, you want them to be done well. As I said, there's a lot of good evidence out there, lots of models of how to do all of these well, how to do service learning well, how to do simulations well. So it's important not just that they're included, but that educators are following what are the best practices, evidence-based methods, to make sure not only that they're effective, but they're nonpartisan. And most importantly, you want teachers to be getting the professional development to engage in all of these activities. So you certainly want your education policies to include professional development for teachers so they feel comfortable, confident in actually moderating a political discussion. And I would say, so again, these are really the best practices in civics education, but I would like to emphasize with my last slide here, it doesn't all end in high school. Civics instruction doesn't end when you graduate from high school. As Patrick mentioned at the outset, I'm involved with a work published by the American Political Science Association called Teaching Civic Engagement Across the Disciplines. Really, in one of, I'm always on my soapbox screaming and yelling that one of the important roles of a college and university is to be preparing their students to be active and engaged citizens, that we can be including civics education, civic engagement instruction in our college classrooms. It doesn't just have to be political science classrooms. It can be all disciplines. And you can do that without sacrificing your core content. More importantly, it doesn't just have to end at the classroom. Lessons in citizenship can be woven throughout the culture of a campus, whether it's residence life or learning communities, Greek and sorority life, fraternity and sorority life, that there is a role for colleges to be playing, an important role. Again, just like a high school, a college can be a microcosm of democracy. And, there's been, some pushback, and it's proven to be, or has been seen to be somewhat controversial. But civic engagement education does not have to be partisan. It can be done nonpartisan. It can be done in a manner that is based on research, that is based on evidence. If it's ideological, it's only in that it supports democratic ideals and democratic values. But it certainly, civics education certainly doesn't end when you graduate from high school. There's a role to be played by colleges and universities, and thankfully there are more and more national organizations, such as the American Political Science Association, such as Campus Compact, such as IDHE, and I have references there for you for all of them that can provide support. So I've taken up too much time. I'll stop there. I do have a slide that has a lot of resources that are available. And again, I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, or you're always welcome to reach out to me via email or Twitter. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much for that wonderful starting us off presentation here for a webinar. And again, folks can type in questions here in the chat box or send me a quick email. I got one quick email about if the presentation slides will be available after the webinar, and they will be, so folks can look forward to that. So you don't feel like you have to write down all of these links here on the resources. And I think our next speaker, Ben, will also have some resources at the end of his presentation. So without much further ado, I'll hand it off to Ben to cover what the states are up to in civics education.
Hi all, as Patrick said, my name is Ben Irwin, and I'm a research analyst with the education program at NCSL, and I'm going to provide an overview of civics education in the states. So I work with the K-12 team, and my issue areas include curriculum, school choice, and school safety, but I was especially excited to speak for this webinar due to my background as a high school social studies teacher in Kentucky. I can recall the excitement of my students when they had the opportunity to make their voices heard, and I'm sure we can all agree that preparing our students to be thoughtful and informed participants in the democratic process is of paramount importance. States are continuing to explore ways to improve civics education and equip students with the necessary tools. State legislators and other stakeholders have approached this issue in diverse ways, including through the integration of civics and curriculum frameworks, which 38 states have implemented. The use of the College, Career, and Civic Life, or C3 curriculum framework developed by the National Council for the Social Studies is growing in popularity, having been adopted in 23 states. Some states are even exploring ways to not only integrate civics into a curriculum framework, but also develop rigorous civics curriculum. 42 states have moved to institute a civics course requirement. Despite most states requiring some form of instruction in civics, this requirement continues to evolve in terms of curriculum emphasis and rigor. All states in the District of Columbia include civics to some degree in state standards. Although civics are included in every state's standards, it is given varying degrees of attention. Oftentimes, civics is incorporated into social studies standards or curriculum frameworks without detailed content and skills outlined. Some states have taken action to be more explicit in these standards. 16 states currently include civics or social studies indicators in their accountability systems, but this may continue to evolve during the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act as states experiment with school quality and student success indicators, as well as other academic indicators. The flexibility of ESSA provides states regarding accountability has opened the door for increasing the significance that civics instruction is afforded. If we can go to the next slide. This map provides an overview of state statute regarding civics assessment requirements. Blue states are states that require students to take and pass a civics exam in order to graduate, while orange states require students to take a civics exam but do not require a passing score as a graduation requirement. State assessments specific to civics have gained momentum as an approach to ensuring students are prepared to participate in civic life. Since 2015, 18 states have enacted civics test requirements, including the use of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Naturalization Test. 10 of these states do not require a passing score for graduation, while 8 of these states do. As will be discussed, this has become a leading legislative trend. If we can go to the next slide. This map provides an overview of state legislative activity in the 2018 session. Blue states enacted legislation, while orange states introduced civics education legislation. As you can see, the 2018 legislative session was a busy one for civics education. At least 115 bills or resolutions were introduced in 31 states. Out of these 115 bills and resolutions, 15 bills and 3 resolutions were enacted in 13 states. In terms of enacted legislation, states approach the issue of civics education in different ways, including the creation of a state diploma seal for students who demonstrated excellence in civics, which Arizona and California instituted. At least 3 bills to establish a commission or study committee to explore curriculum and testing options were enacted, including Georgia House Resolution 634, which creates a study committee to explore the state of civics education in Georgia. Other state action, as well as the work of nonprofit service providers to make recommendations for future action in Georgia. At least 4 states enacted measures to fund civics education initiatives, including Minnesota House Bill 707, which provides annual grant funding to the Minnesota Civics Education Coalition, which is a series of nonprofits who seek to engage youth in the democratic process. Some states passed legislation similar to Arizona Senate Bill 1520, which appropriates funding for curriculum and standards development specifically. Washington, through Washington House Bill 1896, became the 42nd state to implement a civics course requirement, while also providing funding for teacher professional development focused on civics instruction. Finally, getting back to civics assessments, Pennsylvania House Bill 564 made Pennsylvania the 18th state in a growing trend requiring a civics assessment. Although they provide access to the U.S. citizenship and immigration services naturalization test resources, House Bill 564 is unique in that they leave test development and administration up to the districts. Pennsylvania, like some states who require the test, do not make passing the test a graduation requirement. Other states proposed similar legislation that ultimately failed, while Missouri enacted a civics test requirement specific to students graduating public institutions of higher ed. States continue to develop and introduce new ways to address gaps in civic knowledge. Assessment and curriculum development have gained momentum in many states, and as Brian Barish will highlight, state legislators are considering impactful and innovative methods to ensure students are equipped with the tools necessary for active participation in a democratic society. These resources were used along with NCSL's legislative and policy tracking to provide an overview of civics education in the states. And if you have any further questions regarding state action, you can reach me at benjamin.irwin@ncsl.org.
Well, great. Thanks for that wonderful presentation, Ben. And like you said, you can reach him out with any further questions. Either reach out to myself or him, and we will be sure to get back to you to address your question or concern. Next up, as Ben noted, we're going to speak with Brian from Massachusetts about a piece of legislation there.
Great. So my name is Brian Barish. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and General Counsel for Massachusetts Senate President Harriet Chandler. And she filed a Senate bill now numbered 2375, an act to promote and enhance civic engagement. Now, this bill began with a process at the beginning of this legislative session to bring together a wide variety of groups that had an interest in this. We have a ton of talent around civic education in Massachusetts, but they hadn't really done a lot of advocacy at the legislative level. So, we brought in experts in civics, experts in education. We worked with our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, as well as our Executive Office of Education, to try and pull all the stakeholders together and say, how do we really make sure civics becomes a priority in our schools again? And as part of that process, we developed sort of a number of pieces that actually worked really well in tandem with some things our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education were already doing. So this year, just this past month, they instituted a new civics course requirement in 8th grade for all schools. So to work along with that, what our bill does is, first, it provides a stable funding source for civics education. So we created a Civics Project Trust Fund, which can be funded in two ways, both through private funding options is left as an option that we're still exploring, and then public funding, which the Senate allocated $1.5 million in its budget this year to fund. And I should mention, this bill has passed the Senate. A slightly different version has passed our House of Representatives, and that is currently in a conference committee, so this is not law yet, but we are pretty close to resolving those differences, and hopefully we'll have a bill before the end of this month. Now, the key piece in my mind of what this bill does is it creates a student-led civics project requirement at two separate grade levels, one which would have to be completed after the 8th grade and one of which could be completed in a different grade. Now, the goal here was that students would take this 8th grade required course and then have some follow-up ability to have a hands-on experience in civics in high school. Along with that, we also have a civics curriculum requirement, which really mirrors what we are already doing, but given that over the years as curriculums evolved, civics has become more and less important, it seemed important to us to make sure it was in statute, that the things we're hoping to do now don't get eroded at some future point by some future administration. In terms of implementation, one of the key things that we have added in there is the concept of regional civics councils, which would be sort of regional bodies that could include academics and people involved in the schools, as well as local community and business leaders, to help guide and give advice to schools as they're developing these civics programs. And this is one of the key things that we focused on and heard a lot about when we were developing this bill, which is the importance of balancing the need to say at the state level, we need to do some key things here to make sure everyone's learning quality civics, with the need to make sure local communities have a strong say in how this civics is implemented. So for example, with our projects requirement, it doesn't actually specify what courses projects need to be taught in, what grades. It could be a separate class, it could be integrated into a class. The key idea for us was to give that flexibility for schools to experiment and do something that works for them. Now, in addition, there are two sort of ancillary, but we felt really complementary pieces that we added in. One, which we call the Kennedy Brooks Civics Challenge, which is named after two U.S. senators from Massachusetts, one who is a Democrat, one who is a Republican. And the idea here is to add a sort of like a spelling bee kind of thing, where there would be an opportunity to have competitive evaluation of civics projects and students who excel to sort of go on to local and then statewide competitions to sort of highlight their civics projects. And the other of which is a really interesting concept we took from actually a California law, which is the High School Voter Challenge, which tasks our Secretary of State with setting up a student-led voter registration drives at certain key times before elections to make sure students are both participating in registering other students to vote, but also that students, while they're in school, have the opportunity to register to vote if that's something they want to do. So we really look to put together this package of complementary pieces that would go hand in hand with things our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education were already doing, to sort of be as robust and comprehensive as we could be. And one of the key things here is we really felt like hands-on learning was something that was absolutely necessary if you really want people to understand the political process and to feel that there's value in it. Nothing you're going to read in a book is going to make you get the same sense that legislatures work and city councils work, as much as actually going and saying, I have something I want to see change in my community, and whether that goes forward or not, getting to work with those stakeholders and make the case, I think really gives people a better understanding of how these things work and some real buy-in that these things do work. One example I'll give, there's a state rep we have by the name of Andy Vargas. He's one of the youngest state reps in our state house. And he actually first got involved through a group called UTech Lowell, where they do civic engagement, things like that. And one of the first things he did was help advocate for a civics bill in the legislature. And this past year when he became a legislator, he actually got to play a key role in helping us get the bill to this point and hopefully passing it this session. So I just think that speaks to the power that hands-on civics can have when we do it right. So I think I'll leave it there. I think we wanted to leave some time for questions. And if you want to get in touch with me, my email is brian.barish@masenate.gov. I'm happy to help answer any questions people have about what we're doing in Massachusetts, or if you have any questions, so let us know.
Well, thanks so much, Brian. That was really great to see, kind of walk us through that piece of legislation. And I've got one question here to start us off for Professor Maddow, and I'm just going to jump back to the pertinent slide here. When you talked about defining civics education here with the kind of three strands, in terms of kind of the best practices that you were also talking about, are these kind of recommended for every grade level as you kind of do them simultaneously, or are they kind of things that you build on one and then you build on the next in kind of a progression sort of way? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say certainly all facets of civic engagement education can be offered at all levels of education, elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. But certainly you want to modify them, you want to adjust them based on the age level. I think one thing that's so exciting about the legislation that Brian just referenced, the notion of really trying to link it to issues that are pertinent in your community, make it as local as possible, as relevant as possible. So there is, the notion of scaffolding is something you hear in education curriculum and even education policy. Certainly you want to be building upon previous experiences. And that's why it's so important, again, that civic education is not necessarily just a one-shot, and I understand sometimes you need to sort of pick your battles and locate it, in a period during the timeline when it makes most sense. But, it's not enough to just have, although I welcome and think it's fantastic to have a class in civic education in 8th grade, you want to be able to be building, a real toolkit throughout your education. The ideal situation is you're having these sorts of experiences in, first through third, then fourth through eighth, and then high school, and then college, and that all of these activities can be modified based on students' age and level of experience. You can certainly, you can do a campaign simulation for first graders and seniors in high school. It might look different when you're doing it with first graders and when you're doing it with seniors in high school. But it doesn't mean that one is more appropriate at one age than another. So I would say all three strands really can be and should be incorporated throughout the educational experience, but can be modified in a way that makes sense not just for the student's age level, but, again, highlighting the legislation that Brian brought up, issues that matter in that community. That's going to make it most relevant to students.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that is that I really think this is both about what we're teaching in schools, but also as legislators and legislative staff, recognizing that this is sort of a two-way street. If you're actively engaging in your community and with your schools and going out of your way to sort of bring the legislature to the people, you sort of have another avenue to make an impact here other than just through the legislation you pass. The legislators playing an active role in that process can make a big difference. And my boss, Senator Chandler, actually goes into her schools, pretty much every one of her high schools every year to talk to them about civics, about the importance of getting registered and things like that. So I think that plays a critical role as well, along the lines of what Elizabeth was saying, and sort of making sure there's a comprehensive and evolving experience for students.
And I think just helping students understand that politics doesn't just take place in Washington, D.C., in the White House and Congress. Helping them understand that, their school system is the policies, the quality of their lunch, the quality of their textbooks, what's going on in their own most immediate community. That those decisions, more often than not, are determined by boards of education. Okay, well, who serves on the Board of Education? How do you get on the Board of Education? Helping them understand that things that are going on in their community, they're not, there may be some connection to the White House and the Capitol and U.S. Congress, but more often than not, it has to do with political decisions and political actors that are down the street from their school or in their state house, in their state. So the more, I completely agree, the more you can be bringing local public officials into the classroom and taking students out of the classroom and taking them to these bodies, field trips to City Hall, field trips to the state legislature, having a democratic simulation actually at a state legislature, actually allowing students the opportunity to sit maybe in a committee room and see what is it like to sit up here on the dais and speak into a microphone. Again, back to allowing students the opportunity not just to interact with those people that represent them, but practice the skills of actually being an office holder. Right now there's a lot of, I know place a lot of emphasis here, but there's some research going on that we're taking part in and others that demonstrates that young adults, when it comes to propensity to run for office, is incredibly low. Now, I think in recent years, we're seeing a little bit more interest in running for office, but helping students even consider that as a possibility. And again, when you're running for office, it doesn't have to be for Congress. You can run for your Board of Education, for your city council. So the more you can connect students, and again, it can be first graders or it could be seniors in high school, with their local officials, I think it makes a really a significant impact on them.
Yeah, and to that point, one of the things we do here in Massachusetts, I'll mention real quick, is that students actually serve on our school boards. There's a student representative on our school boards, and I think that also sort of gives them that connection.
So we have a couple questions coming in through our chat box here, and I'll start us off with maybe Professor Maddow can start us off here, and then Brian and Ben can add to it as things occur to them. Ethel has asked, are there efforts to integrate civics education in college-level curriculums? We focused a little bit more on that kind of K-12 curriculum so far, but what about the college-level curriculums as well?
Yes. And I'm happy to be a part of that effort. I would say, it's waxed and waned throughout American history, but certainly in the last 10 years in particular, a growing and growing emphasis on the role of colleges and universities in integrating civics instruction into their curriculum. And to put in a plug, I only put in this plug because these books are free and available online. The American Political Science Association has published 2 books in recent years about teaching our students to be active citizens, and I'm happy to be a part of both of them. And there are 2 texts that are available online that I have. There's a slide that Patrick has available, but teaching civic engagement across the disciplines is the most recent one. But there are a number of institutional techniques and approaches to pedagogy that university professors, faculty can integrate into their coursework, whether it's a political science classroom or a humanities classroom, one in the sciences. In the text that I edited, Teaching Civic Engagement, we have a lot of examples and models of how faculty from different disciplines have incorporated civics instruction into their coursework. So, for example, we have a professor at a large state university who teaches English composition. All freshmen need to take English composition. But in his instruction, he includes doing some research on a policy issue of relevance to their local community. Students write a policy brief for the mayor. They present it to the mayor. So certainly they're getting their English composition instruction, but also they're getting an opportunity to connect it to local politics. We have examples from civil engineering, where students not only are working in their labs on the college campus, but going into local classrooms in their community and helping redesign parking lots and playgrounds. So certainly, in this text and others, there's plenty of models on how to incorporate this sort of instruction into your classroom, whether you're political science or another discipline. But even more importantly is there's a lot of good research taking place right now on those campuses that really have a campus culture that fosters an interest and a commitment to democratic participation. And a lot of this research, and they're cited here, comes out of the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education. It's a great resource. The woman who heads it, the director, Nancy Thomas, is really at the forefront of this work. But there are campuses that really know how to prepare their students to be informed and engaged citizens. And it tends to be those campuses that allow their students to play a meaningful role in decision-making on the college campus. It tends to be campuses that offer lots of opportunities for students to talk about politics. And I know there's it's a heated topic right now about academic freedom and free speech on college campuses. But really, colleges that make it, students that go to a college where they're frequently engaging in political discussion, whether it's in the classroom or on the quad, those are the students that are getting an opportunity to practice political discussion, building those critical thinking skills, those skills of being able to deliberate and collaborate together. So bottom line is, yes, there's a good deal of scholarship, and I would say there's a real emphasis lately from national organizations, whether it's the American Political Science Association, Campus Compact, Institute for Democracy and Higher Education. A lot of emphasis right now on teaching students to be engaged and informed citizens, and more importantly, making sure you're using the best practices when it comes to engaging in this sort of instruction. I'll stop there.
And we have a second question came in from Shauna asking which states are considered the gold standard of civics education. And so maybe you could consider this question in terms of, maybe there's recent legislation. We've highlighted one bill really closely today, but maybe there's some recent legislation that you feel like incorporate some of those best practices, or states that have done that for a little while now that maybe then Shauna and others could kind of use to kind of look at for maybe ideas for their own states.
And I'll say one thing on this, and Ben may have more to say on this too, but first of all, just the presentation that Brian gave, I think that legislation really reflects, I don't know it well, but I know from what I heard from Brian, it really reflects the scholarship on civic engagement education. The fact that there's emphasis on project-based learning, the fact that there's emphasis on peer-to-peer engagement. I love the component, the high school component, where high schoolers are going out and actually registering others in their community or working with others to register people in their community. So I think any state social studies curriculum or standards that incorporates these different methods of instruction, those in my mind would be the states that really are the gold standard. I think Ben referenced in his resources, there's a new report that just came out from the Brown Center on Education Policy at Brookings. I think he may have listed it in his resources, but they do a nice assessment, basically. They look at a number, I think every state's curricular framework, their state standards, and document which states really offer a multifaceted approach to civics instruction, civic engagement. So it should be those states that don't just offer classes or require coursework that will build political knowledge, but also those states that really place an emphasis on active citizenship and teaching the skills of citizenship. Those states that incorporate simulations and debates and discussions. I would say those would be the states that really show, those in my mind would be the gold standard. But Ben and Brian may have more to say on that than me.
The one thing I'll add is for legislators and legislative staff, I would just encourage you to work very closely with your state administrations and your state boards of education on this, because it really is critical, not just that you have the strongest set of laws, but the way they're being implemented by your state administration and then at the local board level is critical to making it, actually a comprehensive civic education.
And if you're looking for more specific examples of state policies and kind of the different areas I outlined, I'd encourage you to reach out to me so that I can provide you with kind of an overview of those topic areas and the different approaches, whether it's assessments or curriculum development.
I would just add one more thing on that, on the issue of assessment too, and I think Ben referenced this in his presentation. There are a number of states right now that are including requirements that high schoolers take and pass something similar to the citizenship test. And I think that that may have value. I think my only concern would be if that's the sole method of assessment, and if that's the sole method of assessment, that suggests that there's really a primary emphasis on building political knowledge, which again, in and of itself is fun, but it really, in order to have a well-rounded civics education, has to include instruction when it comes to skill building and building a disposition to be a democratic citizen. It's not as easy to assess, that's for sure, but there are plenty of models out there that certainly Ben may have them, I can make them available to you on how do you assess civics in such a way that you're not just accounting for political knowledge, but also skills and attitudes. Again, it's referenced in my resources, but CIRCLE is a fantastic resource. CIRCLE stands for the Center for Information and Research for Civic Learning and Engagement. It's one of the best research centers out there nationally that focuses on civic education. They, I know, have some models up there of assessments that you can use. I have them on our website for the Teaching Civic Engagement website. There are some models. There are a number of assessments out there, rubrics that can be used that will capture not just students' knowledge, but their level of preparation to be informed and engaged citizens and their propensity to be informed and engaged citizens. So just like civic education should be multifaceted, the assessment should be multifaceted.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add, we did work with Circle as one of the groups we consulted with, and they were very helpful.
They're the best.
Well, I'm just going to pipe in here, too, to add one more resource for everyone to look for and reach out to NCSL about. We have a great back-to-school program for, as Brian was really doing great to highlight, and also Professor Maddow and Ben, to get legislators out into the classroom and legislative staff. Our back-to-school program has some great resources to help folks do that, so feel free to reach out to either myself or Ben or even others at NCSL here, and we'll make sure to connect you with those great resources as well as the other things we've listed here for you. And with that, I will wrap up our webinar. I'd just like to thank our three speakers today for giving us their time and expertise here to talk to us about a really important subject for our democracy today. So thanks, everyone, and thanks for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.